Welcome to Jesus Changes Everything, a daily podcast dedicated to providing a fresh look at the ancient and glorious truth that Jesus not only reigns, but is busy about the business of bringing all things under subjection, that celebrates the wonder and the glory that he has been given all authority in heaven and on earth. You know that God's gifts are innumerable. They can't be counted. Earlier today, Lisa and I were out on a drive, and we have recently had, roughly a foot, maybe a little more than that, of snow fall, and the roads were sufficiently clear that it was safe to drive. But what we saw beside the roads, in the yards of the homes in our neighborhood, or the grounds of the park that we drove through, was not just this incredibly beautiful blanket of white, but these sparkling diamonds. The sun is out and shining, and it's causing these particular snowflakes to shine, and each one of them is a gift. Now, I mention all that because it's time for another Forever Friend segment, and the friend that I'd like to speak to today, or speak about today, is not a friend that I was ever particularly close to. He and I never sort of hung out together. We never went to the movies together. We were not, we never talked on the phone together. He was just sort of part of the setting of my life over the space of about 4 years or so. He was in my class at Cook Township Elementary School in Stallstown, Pennsylvania, where I attended first through third grade. And then in the ninth grade, I went to Ligonier Valley Junior High, and he was in my class. He was also on the same basketball team with me. I should say I was on the same basketball team with him, since he got more playing time than I did. So that's sort of the context where I saw this friend. His name is Eddie Golden, and it is a most fitting name. Not Eddie, he wasn't Eddie Haskell-like, but Golden fits. Eddie Golden was golden in this sense. He was a happy and friendly child. He was a peaceful and friendly child. He was a funny and friendly child. He wasn't the class clown. He wasn't obnoxious. He wasn't striving to be the center of attention. He was just naturally funny. Good-humored is maybe the better way to put it. And, even though I had closer friends in those classes than Eddie, he was around for so much of what went on, and just was always fun to have. I think there's one other time, though, that I should mention. That first through third grade, and then many of the kids that continued on in the public schools, I would tend to see in Little League or midget football or other situations like that. So I did maintain, while I was while I was attending this local private school, I maintained some relationships with kids that I had been in public school with. But mostly that was in those sports situations. Well, I didn't have a sports situation with Eddie until we played on the same basketball team in the ninth grade. But it was good to be reunited with him in that ninth grade. But then I want to fast forward another 6 or so years. I happened to be attending the annual festival in Ligonier. It's called Fort Ligonier Days, and it is a massive festival, kind of old-fashioned days, remembering the history of Ligonier and the fort, and a big parade and fair food and all that kind of stuff. And I had been out of town really for several years at this point, and was out of college, I think, even by this point. So I hadn't really seen Eddie Golden since the ninth grade. And you've probably been in these situations where maybe you go back to your old hometown and you remember everybody the way they were the last time you saw them. And so when you see them, you're a little uncertain. Is that the right person? And you wonder if they recognize you. Well, this happened at this Fort Ligonier Days. Now that I'm an adult, and I ran across Eddie Golden. And there was not a moment of hesitation. There wasn't a moment of uncertainty. There wasn't a moment of aloofness. Eddie? I said. Craig, he said, because that's what my name was back then. And we spent a good 15 or 20 minutes standing there in the midst of this great festival, just catching up and talking to one another. And it was just an absolute joy and delight. Now, I'm going to have the same problem I often have. Because he has a common name, I'm not sure that I'm going to be able to track him down. So if you know an Eddie Golden, tall and thin, good-humored, golden-tempered, if you know an Eddie Golden whose roots go back to Western Pennsylvania, would you let him know that Craig Sproul is giving thanks to God that he was a part of my growing up, and that he was just a delightful friend to have. Is there ever a circumstance where it is righteous to not tell the truth? Yes. Jesus reminded us in his Sermon on the Mount that the Ten Commandments are rather wider in scope than we might be tempted to believe. If we avoid first-degree murder, we haven't escaped the charge of failing to keep the seventh commandment. One could argue that the ninth commandment merely forbids perjury, the giving of false testimony in the context of a trial. Honesty, however, would require us to note that its intent is likewise far more broad-minded. James, after all, encourages us to let our yea be yea and our nay be nay. We are people of the Word, redeemed by the one who is truth. Truth ought to be our hallmark. That said, the majority report of the church over the ages has been more nuanced. While truthfulness ought to be the order of the day among Christians, there are contexts wherein a failure to tell the truth is actually praiseworthy. The church has argued not that we must always tell the truth, but that we must tell the truth to whom the truth is due. Even if this is correct, and I believe it is, we're still left with the difficult task of determining to whom the truth is due. Those who take this position would note that in the context of war, especially just war, the enemy is not due the truth. Thus, Rahab, who made it into the great hall of faith in Hebrews 11, lied about the spies she was hiding in Jericho. Or one could argue that the Hebrew midwives likewise did well in lying to the Pharaoh. In like manner, the false, quote, camp established by the Allies to trick the Axis powers into believing that their assault on France would not come at Normandy is also just. The same principle, of course, would also give us freedom to lie when the Nazis are at our door, looking for those we are hiding. The same principle loosely translates into more mundane circumstances. When the Steelers' quarterback pretends to hand the ball off to his tailback, this is designed to persuade the defense of an untruth, that it's a running play. When Bobby Fischer moves this piece that way in a feint, Boris Spassky cannot charge him with a sin. Even fiction is, from one perspective, a failure to tell the truth. But if we call this lying, then Jesus is in hot water, since a certain sower did not really go out to sow seed, and some of that seed did not really fall on the rocky soil. The temptation here, because we are by nature dishonest, is to develop rather narrow standards as to whom is due the truth. We might be tempted to believe that our wives are not due the truth when they ask us how we like the new recipe they just tried. We might be tempted to think our bosses are not due the truth when they ask us why we're not coming into work on that particular day. Wisdom and honesty would compel us to have only the most rigorous standards as to when we might be free to mislead or even to lie. This issue, of course, this is a matter over which Christians have disagreed over the years. Good men, I would argue, have been on both sides of the issue. My prayer is that even if you and I are on different sides, that we can honestly and without guile remember that we are, in fact, together on the same side of the great war against the serpent and against his seed.
You've been listening to the Jesus Changes Everything podcast, a production of Dunamis Fellowship, the teaching outreach of Dr. R.C. Sproul Jr. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we encourage you to subscribe, which you can do at all the usual outlets, to tell your friends, and to spread the word. To learn more about the work of Dunamis Fellowship, please visit rcsproulJR.com. And join us next time on Jesus Changes Everything.